So the next session, still cross-border, Min, with the application of Mojaloop for cross-border wallet remittance. I think you're referring to two corridors, Singapore, Myanmar, and Singapore, Philippines, right? All right, take it away.
Before I start, I just want to say something out loud. I think it needed to be said. I'm sure everyone's thinking about it. No one probably have said it. So compliance regulations, I understand I come from a bank, some big banks like Bank of New York Mellon to Myanmar Bank. Compliance regulations, it's being weaponized for political reasons. And that led to criminalization of the poor in emerging markets. I just want to state that out clear, what's happening. So let me just state that. I'm sure everyone's thinking about it. I want to say it out loud. So, you know, many of you attended my last session, so you know why I'm here. I have the loud voice. So let me use that to tell you a little bit of story before I go into the detail of the POC. So many, many years ago, I was a university student. I finished college in the US. I had some student loans. And I had this crazy idea of going to a country called China to start working for a fintech startup there. It was a fantastic experience. What happened was every end of the month, I have to find a way to send money back to the US bank account to pay my student loans. I rely on the banks for at least 5 days, if not longer. My money goes into a black hole. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of money, so I'm really scared for that 5 days until the money show up in my US bank account. And then something happened. I have a very trusted friend who said, Min, go to this little shop in this area in Shanghai. There's going to be this guy. You just give him the money. And I was like, what are you talking about? So I go to this little place. I gave him the money. And you know, the gentleman was explaining to me, I'm going to buy something for you called Bitcoin. I'm going to send it to a buddy in the US. And I was like, no way. And then my buddy in the US said, okay, all of us going to be on Skype call, okay? So you pay the money. At the time, Bitcoin, it takes about 30 minutes for the transaction. And when I bought it, it was around $10, $15 when I started the transaction. Of course, it's kind of expand. But 30 minutes, I was willing to sit in this little office because that 30 minutes of waiting for my money to show up in my friend's account, which then goes into my bank account, it was that much faster. I was happy to sit 30 minutes because otherwise I would have to wait 5 days, if not longer. So that was my cross-border experience, and I'm so thankful. But anyway, I no longer have to pay college loans, so that problem stopped. And then I joined a organization called Bank of New York Mellon, and at the time I was in Hong Kong, and China came up with a really cool idea to let foreign investor in US-denominated funds to invest in Chinese stock markets. So then I was put in that project, and again, I had to deal with the cross-border settlement. It was miserable, but it was very, very, it was a great learning process. So that was my second cross-border. And then I went back to Myanmar, my home country, as you know, at the time, there was a lot of political liberalization, so I had a financial institution group of one of the largest banks in Myanmar, and guess what? I had to set up correspondent banking relationships. Absolutely miserable process, with the hope that at one day it would actually make cross-border payment easy. It did not, still doesn't. Though I was brought up as a Buddhist, so we believe in karma. So I must have done something absolutely horrible in my previous life that I have not escaped this cross-border settlement. Now, there is hope. In addition to what I will talk about, there are some very cool projects going on, Project Jasper, Project Zubin, a lot of things that are going on to, at the very highest level, there's recognition that this is an issue and there's new technology being applied, CBDC, distributed ledger technology to solve that using atomic settlement and what have you. So there's hope, right? So with that note, let me go through into the presentation. Thank you. So the proof of concept that we started out is to ensure it's a wallet-to-wallet cross-border remittance, right? And the project is sponsored by Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is Singapore Central Bank. It is to originate in Singapore and to remit to countries like Myanmar and Philippines. Now, so a lot of Myanmar migrant workers and Filipino migrant workers go to Singapore to work. So there's a big migrant worker population in Singapore, so it makes why these two corridor the ideal corridor. There was a third corridor that I tried to add, which is the Singapore-Indonesian as well, but for a variety of reasons that was not successful. So this is the general process that we're doing. In terms of the participant, in Singapore, the originating DFSP, as we call it in Mojaloop community, is called Lucy. It's a neobank. Of course, in the middle is Mojaloop and Visa Direct system. The recipient in Myanmar is CB Bank, and within CB Bank is CB Pay. In Philippines is UBX, which is a part of Union Bank of Philippines, and they have a lot of their own cash out mechanism out there. So this is the general overview of the project. Okay. Okay. So the participants, this is how it work. Partnership with Visa and Infotech, as I mentioned before, and in terms of the banking partners, the FSB, Lucy, CB Bank, and UBX. Let me take an opportunity to kind of set the scene as well. So the project, there was a philosopher. If anyone wants to guess who was the philosopher, Warren's smiling, so I'm sure he has an answer. So it's our own very Michael Richards. So there was a philosopher involved, and there was an engineer who was our CTO, Gual, and then Julie, who was formerly from Red Compass, but now a new entity. And she was very good at making sure that the philosopher and the engineers are doing something realistic and logical. So those are the three people that are instrumental in this project. Pretty soon we're going to fix this, right? Hopefully before we fix the cross-border issue. My joke aside, I'm not, So the problem as we see it, there are a lot of remittance channels. There are a lot of remittance channels, but they tend to be low. There's a lot of informal channel as well. Many of them happen to be expensive and lack transparency. And also, sorry, were you pointing something? No. Oh, yeah. So a lot of that issue. So that's one element of it. But the further problem is that remittance channel doesn't reach to the rural area, where a lot of the family, the beneficiary of the migrant workers who are working overseas, right? So they have to transmit it, they have to remit it back to their family who live in rural area. There are no financial institutions that can facilitate that. So it takes a lot longer and it's a lot more costly. And it is nearly impossible, but not impossible, it's just costly. So that's the problem that we're trying to figure out to solve. And it's not just in these two channels, it exists. Yeah, which way? Okay, I'll aim it at Steve. Okay, so try to put a little bit of a graphical representation. If you look at it from a socioeconomic status, upper class, middle class, lower income, and then geographical, urban, suburban, semi-urban, and rural area, right? This is kind of like the client clustering. So if you look at the corner here, the yellow corner, where rural and lower income, that's the area that we're trying to make sure that remittance network reach. Right? Usually the immediate close proximity financial service providers are cash out agents, MFIs, and rural banks. This is true in almost any market as well. The challenge is that those rural banks cannot connect to national payment system, they cannot connect to international payment system. Some would try to connect to the commercial banks, which are prime beneficiary of the national payment switches, but there are a lot of legal compliance, financial requirement, capital requirements, so that's where we see a missing link, right? So that's one issue. And of course, financial institution being small, they cannot directly connect to a national payment switch as well. It's not just the capital or regulatory requirement, it's also the technical challenges as well, right? So connecting to a national system is not an easy process, and it requires a lot of investment. So there are a couple of missing links. So the hypothesis that we built in this going into this project is that can we build a very affordable switch or a hub that is specifically targeting the rural banks or the MFIs or MBFIs, and leverage that in a way to connect to a national system or an international system. In our case, we use WinePay, and of course in Philippines, we use an I2I platform. So that was the hypothesis going in. So the goals we set, somewhat ambitious, is to connect small financial institutions to real-time payment network. In addition to that, we want to create this POC, and we want to carry out a POC in such a way that the solution that we develop here are replicable, scalable, not just in Myanmar, but in any other markets that have a lot of remittance volume, right? So our friends in Mexico, I mean, everywhere in the world. And lastly, of course, to make sure that the remittance is cheaper and faster, here we limit it to Singapore to Philippines and Singapore to Myanmar. So this is kind of the key goals. And then trying to envision the steady state, right? So we started out at a POC, but we wanted to envision what it could potentially achieve. So current existing option in terms of a network meaning access to the unbanked and the underbanked, it's either closed loop or it's a preferred network. So it's not, it's not interoperable, right? It's very challenging. What we are hoping is that it will become interoperable. So that's one. The last mile network, there is no current existing system doesn't have a efficient last mile connectivity to the end beneficiary. We hope that that will be the case. The channels, usually in Myanmar and in Philippines, we use an Indian term called a Hindi term called hundi, which is informal channels. Some are reliable. I'm not saying anything bad about the system. Some are reliable, some are not. Like anything, there are bad players, good players. But the system, in a way, it works. And people have relied on this socially based system for a long, long time, much before interoperable systems were built. So this is something that's been around for a long time. We want to make sure that it is something that is mobile wallets, so existing user interface, mobile networks, is something faster, technology-driven, traceable, auditable. That's something that we're looking for. Of course, cost higher, lower. We couldn't put numbers into it, but hopefully lower than exact what it is right now. The settlement speed, the current system, T+2, T+3, that's kind of being optimistic, but we're trying to see if it is something like an instant settlement within 30 seconds or what have you. That's the envisioning of the success, right? We want to look for something that is positive and something that we can look up to, so that's how we set our goals. So the project scope, I wanted to use what BIS has created, and it's absolutely fabulous. So in order for the remittance to become a tool of financial inclusion, right, what we're trying to accomplish, there are multiple pieces that have to come together, an ecosystem that has to come together. So one, the critical pillars, as BIS identified, and this is absolutely accurate, you have to have a transaction account and payment product design. So that's definitely, there's one. We're able to leverage existing products in our network. Readily available access point, awareness of financial literacy, and leveraging on large volume, but more importantly than large volume is recurring, right? Recurring payment is something that is absolutely needed. In addition to that, you need to have foundation, which is financial and ICT infrastructure, sustainable commercial arrangements, legal regulatory framework, which previous participants already spoken quite about, including the public and private sector commitment as well. So in this process, the lighter blue are the areas that we focus on, which is readily available access point, in which, in this project, we look at MFIs, wallets, and rural banks. The recurring payment is very important because for the system to develop and habits to form, you need a recurring process, and remittance is a very good thing. Just like me trying to pay my college loan on a monthly basis, salary on a monthly basis is being remitted, and that creates a habit and the sticky point, if you will. The financial and ICT infrastructure, of course, is something that we're doing. The commercial arrangement, legal regulatory framework, we didn't touch on this issue in this particular project. So there are alternatives. So this is, again, BIS model that we incorporated. So there's the correspondent banking model, which I spoke briefly about. There's the interlinking model, which is two payment system connecting. So the like would be like, the FedWire and the Mexico Connect, and also linkage between PayNow and PromptPay in Singapore and Thailand, all those projects. So those are system linking together. Single platform model, which is quite, the global payment network. And then you have peer-to-peer model, the newer technology that are coming out. What we're trying to do, of course, is the interlinking model. There is a government-to-government interlink model that are going on, and some are being rolled out quite successfully as well. We're looking at something that is doing it in another, call it a sub-layer that can augment the national process. So strategic goal, it will be a catalyst for financial inclusion. We are designing it for end user, which is the unbanked and the underbanked. We put speed to market as a priority, and the design behind that is that we want to solve it as quickly as possible. And the idea that we had is we want to leverage on existing technology as much as possible. So we leverage on existing network that Visa Direct has, both in Philippines and in Myanmar. Also, the established relationship that, of course, CB Pay already have a relationship with CB Bank, of course, but the Lucy network as well. And then also we want to leverage on the existing infrastructure of Visa Direct, a particular area and then, of course, replicable and scalable blueprint. So this is a general architecture. At the originating point, there will be Lucy, which is, again, neobank. They would connect to Visa Direct. Visa Direct would then work with cross-network provider in Myanmar, that would be WinePay, and in Philippines, it would be I2I platform. Cross-network provider help connect messaging, and then it will reach to the local settlement hubs, local helps, and then that would then goes to wallet A, wallet B, or the endpoint, the FSPs. In terms of the transaction flow, this is very Mojaloop. So you start with the payment initiation, then you will go on alias lookup, resolution, and then payer confirm and transact. And then it will go into clearing and settlement, and then, of course, transaction confirmation. So these are all very fine and well-developed within the own Mojaloop. But what would happen if Mojaloop is connected to another payment system, right? This is something that we're trying to figure out, and we're trying to connect. And so this is just general layers of how money get, $100 being sent from Singapore ended up with 4,000 Philippine peso. There are all the different areas, roles that are involved. So let's talk a little bit about how it happened. So let me just recognize that in a normal world, what we would need is an originating FI, or otherwise known as BIN sponsor as well, to be able to connect to Visa Direct. In our POC, we didn't use the BIN sponsor. In a normal circumstances, you would need one, but in this process, we don't use it. The Lucy platform connected directly into Visa Direct platform. So the first is alias resolve request. When a payee put in the phone number, that would trigger the alias resolve. And then the Visa Direct system will come up with the response, right? So this is the first step. So let me just add in here. So in this particular model, a lot of people talk about repositories and database as well. So in the model that we use here, we use what could be termed or what could be closed as a federated database model. What's happening here in our POC, but this is not the actual implementation, but in the POC is that the cross-network provider from the Mojaloop has its own alias directory. That directory is calling Visa Direct APIs to go and update, create, delete, or update the alias on the Visa Direct alias directory. Right, Michael? No? Okay. So generally speaking, that's right. And then at the second stage, the push button transaction is request, and then it's respond. So this is happening on the originating side. So after the Visa receive all this transaction, Visa is talking to the core connector, post-receive OCD request, and then send request from CMP back to the system. So this is fairly technical, but the general flow is there. Michael, do you want to add anything?
Well, really just to say that the way this works is that the funds are actually transferred into an account
Yeah, sorry. So all the funds that are transferred via the Visa Direct system go through into the same account at the cross-network provider bank. And effectively, that's a form of settlement.
Yep.
So they can then be used as collateral for the receiving bank to settle across to the eventual destination, DFSPs, the mobile wallets, those sorts of things, which, apart from the fact that we found it hard to get a commitment as to when the funds would actually arrive, was something that I think works very well and provides a good model for the future.
Yeah, so in the POC itself, it was difficult to get to that level, but that particular model works in any other, existing settlement models. So what is then happening within the core connector and the Mojaloop is that the sending put transfer requests go into the Mojaloop connector, the quotes come back. Here, I just would like to highlight that we did not put fees and FX. We hard-coded those into the system, but in the actual implementation of it, the fees and the FX requirement will be put into the core connector, and then that would go in the sixth step, which is put quotes ID. That information will be relayed on that particular step. If in the case of an actual implementation. And then that request is going back to the Visa Direct. There's code, anywho, transfer, I'm just reading out everything. The response from the core connector will go into Visa Direct, and Visa Direct would ensure that transaction completes. So in order to make all of this happen, we put three particular innovation, if we like to call it, in place. One is cross-network provider, and the second is multiple alias Oracle. Third one is settlement model V2, and we'll go a little bit more into details on this now. So cross-network provider, so I'll try to explain as I understood it. So when I was talking to my colleague Goal, he was trying to explain it, and I took away that, okay, cross-network provider to me is simply as Google Translate, right? Of course, Michael's having face, but basically two systems have two different languages, and they have to be the messages have to be translated. So essentially, cross-network provider first convert the message, sign the message, encrypt, and then on the way back, it decrypt and then encrypt again. So it's basically a translator, as I understand it. When I explained it, I said, oh, it's basically Google Translate. My colleague go on look, have a friendly look. It's not quite like that, but anyhow, for me, I understand it as Google Translate. So that's what's happening. Of course, there's a lot more technical details involved in there, and there are, this is something that I don't understand, so I just put in there for someone smarter than me to talk about it. But if you have any question, please feel free to come back to us. One thing that I would like to do is we use synchronous model in our POC instead of asynchronous. In implementation with the I2I platform, we have some challenges because I2I is primarily asynchronous, but we found a way to get around that. Multiple alias Oracle. So this is something that I'm not sure if it is relevant in developed markets, but it's something very relevant in developing or emerging markets. What happened is that in the Mojaloop system, we primarily rely on the phone number as an identifier, or the alias as we call it in the system. In Myanmar, there's multiple issues. So a single phone number, a unique number, is being used to register in multiple wallets. The reason that they have to register in multiple wallets is because there's no interoperability. So if I want to pay to 3 different people, I have to have 3 different wallets. That's a fairly common issue. In an international payment, broader international payment system that relies on IBAN or what have you, there's a unique identifier. One number means one thing, one institution within that network. The same cannot be said when we implement this system. We're using Mojaloop, relying on the alias for transacting that. So we have to figure out which wallet to send to. So that was one thing. The second thing is a little less relevant from a technical standpoint, but very relevant from a KYC and a number of other things, is that one smartphone is being used by multiple people, sometime within the family or sometime close associates and what have you. Smartphone, while all of us, I'm sure in this room have smartphone, it's not a ubiquitous amenities that a lot of people that we're trying to help have. And so people usually buy one phone. I've seen situations in Myanmar where a village shares not a big village, but a decent-sized village share one smartphone. And then that's the recipient that receiving the money, and then that person acts as a cash out and what have you, so that function as well. So in a Mojaloop system, when it comes from a developed market like Singapore, there is a unique identifier that's going into the visa, but on the alias resolution, it creates a problem, which wallet to send to. So it has to resolve that addressing particular issue. So there's a number of solutions that we proposed and we developed. First is prefix oracle. The prefix oracle, it's easier if you're using, call it a microfinance company, microfinance institution, which is a bank account and what have you, it's easier. So we use a prefix oracle, basically prefixing the number to the alias. And for the mobile wallet, we use another solution called Alias Oracle. Alias Oracle allows the system to assign a specific financial institution, meaning wallet, right? So there are multiple different wallets. So in an alias, you assign just one into the system. So a recipient may have multiple different wallets, but the system recognizes one as the preferred, sorry, my screen, as the preferred wallet, right? So that the money will be going into that. There's a couple of reasons behind this. If at the originating point, we could solve that by saying, are you sending to X, Y, and Z? And is that person using this DFSP? But then that would require significant user UI changes and UX changes on the sender app. We wanted to avoid this with a POC. Potentially, we can consider that at a later on. We just want to make sure that something works. So this is something that we consider. So there are pros and cons. In terms, so there is a preferred model that we decide, and there's also the latest registration. A user can set which one is the preferred one, or the system would automatically decide that the last DFSP that the user registered is the preferred one. So those are the two solutions that we consider. There are pros and cons, of course. In this POC, we use the default setting as the latest registration. There are pros. It's very simple. So every time you go into the last one, that is the preferred one. And theoretically, if they have used that at the last registration, that's probably the one that they created because they needed it, right? Because that's an assumption, not fully tested, but it makes logical sense. Simple to set up, reasonably efficient. But of course, there are cons as well. May or may not be their preferred, of course, that obviously. And the payee may not actually know that the last one they sign up, the system has automatically designed or designated that one as a preferred one. And so if they are saying that, here's my phone number, please send me money, the money might be actually going to a different wallet or a MFI account or what have you. So there are a couple of trade-offs that we have to consider in this particular area. This is a user journey. So let's say a person with a phone number, right, Ms. Den or however you want to pronounce it, go to CB Pay, CB Wallet, and register as account. Mojaloop will recognize that, and then Mojaloop or Ms. Den Oracle or the repository will say, do you already have this? No, then it will then become the CB Pay by default will become the preferred position. If it is OK dollar, they already have a CB, but they go with the OK dollar, then if they already have a registered account, the new one will be replaced, right? So even though the person have CB Pay, if they CB Pay, they register OK dollar, this would then become their preferred, receiving venue. Again, technical details are here. I think Michael's happy to discuss more if you have any questions or go on the line. Settlement. Settlement is a big issue. I've already talked about cross-border settlement. So even within a local market, settlement between interbank settlement, now with RTGS and central bank involvement, is getting simplified and get easier. With international settlement, the settlement windows are different. When you're using private networks, the settlement windows can be very, very different as well. So trying to figure out a way, the timetable to synchronize on that settlement is becoming a major issue. Now, in a correspondent banking model, there's a lot of bilateral credit facilities that each banks provide to each other, and a lot of that is used to mitigate the risk of the timing issue and other issue related to settlement model. But when you have two separate payment systems, the challenge is a little bit complicated. The second issue is within the Mojaloop, any money coming in is tagged just currently as payment. But in a cross-border settlement, you have a domestic payments, which is going on, but you have the cross-border remittance as well. So in the system for settlement to take place, right, so settlement partner, so let's say, for example, domestic settlement, which is domestic payment, has to be settled in one way, and the cross-border has to settle in a different way. So within the Mojaloop, this different type of payment have to be tagged differently. I'm scared. Every time you have a... so it has to be tagged separately. So this is something that we consider or we have to resolve. So there's a couple of solutions that we talked about in this POC. External transfer, we want to put an identifier type or use sub-scenario elements of the transaction type objects. In both cases, right, the value will be, how shall I say it? The value will be set for the inbound coming into the CNP. There's no changes needed, so this is kind of easier to implement. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the challenge is for the local settlement bank to differentiate what type of transactions that are coming in and which funds that they can use to make those transactions. So this is something that we want to incorporate in the next version of Mojaloop to be able to tag different type of payment in the system. Sorry, okay, those are the next steps. There's a number of things that we have identified. Sorry, I forgot to mention, we are putting a white paper on this as well. We've documented all of these things, and we want to have the community to read through and provide feedback as well. So there's a number of technical challenges that we have to continue to resolve. We have taken shortcuts, if you will, in the POC to make sure that the system works on the end-to-end basis. But what we need to do is we have to figure out the directory structure. Is it a federated or a centralized directory structure, right? And this is not so much of it's partially a technical issue, but it's also more of a political decision from the participating network as well, right? What is something that they want? Whether there's a centralized directory that all the directory reports, or if there's a way for, I think earlier discussion, there was a discussion around this, if there are proxy networks that the system call and then come back and it is understood on a zero-proof basis, right? So this is something that technical solutions are out there to resolve that. It's just a system design that financial institution from a compliance standpoint, regulatory standpoint, they have to resolve. So that's something that we do. Within the private network, it's relatively simple. Duplicated identifier, we already talked about this, multiple alias through Oracle. This is also related to national ID system and what have you as well. This is something that we will continue to resolve. Yep. Okay. Settlement model, of course, we already talked about it. We want to put settlement model between inbound and cross-border, right? So this is something that we have to incorporate into the next version of Mojaloop. KYC information is something that is very critical. So within the Mojaloop system, the account information going back, right? So there is a level of transmission mechanism. What we need to do is understand which jurisdiction require what type of information to do the compliance check. There are several different approaches for it. So for example, in Singapore to Thailand QR linkage, PromptPay and PayNow, the compliance, each jurisdiction take on the compliance responsibility of their own jurisdiction. So when a payee pay, so for example, for a payee from Thailand, payer from Thailand to pay to a payee in Singapore, the financial institution, or trust account as we call it, financial institution in Thailand, first verify the KYC information of the payer. But what they do is they send a notification to the recipient that the funds are on the way, because the KYC settlement process is lagging by the payment. And then once the local, in Thailand side is approved, that information get transferred to the Singapore side, and Singapore do the KYC of the recipient. And there's another time lag. But while all of that is happening, the end recipient has a notification that funds are on the way, and the the notification is instantaneous. However, the compliance check takes some time, and the settlement comes after that. The clearing and settlement comes after the compliance check, and that goes into that. So that's the process that they have modeled. We're not saying that's something that we'll follow, but that's something that we can see and something that we can look at as well. A new upgraded version is coming out there as well, and it's going to work. We haven't, it's between 5 ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries that are doing a model based on that as well. And that will be very exciting to see how that process is working. The reason that we're talking about it is because those are national level KYC clearing, if you will. Once we understand how the national system works, what we're trying to build is trying to extend that benefits of the national system to the unbanked, right? So from an account base, using the same type of infrastructure, data need to the alias-based, the rule-based type. So once we understand what is being done at the national level, it's easier to replicate it to the unbanked and the underbanked community. So we're looking at that closely. There's some things going on, and it's kind of exciting, but we need to understand what, especially not at a national level, we need to understand what national level is doing so that we can incorporate that into the, the private connection, if you will. Fees, I should have added foreign exchange as well. So fees and foreign exchange, when we're trying to make the cross-border remittances cheaper and faster, when we're looking at the cheaper element, there's usually, everyone knows it, there's two, the fees and the foreign exchange. And the fees are easier to justify, or fees are easier to reduce, it's transparent, and it's easier to manage. The challenge is the foreign currency side. So I can share from my Myanmar experience. Myanmar got on the gray list and the blacklist on FATCA, and that has impact on not the only one, but there are other factors, but it has severe impact on the currency. Myanmar devalued significantly. The devaluation led to a divergence between the market rate and the central bank rate as well. So now we have set up a system that can do remittance quite well, but the technology is there, but the foreign currency fluctuation has now become a massive barrier for this transaction to take place. So we solved the technology side, but the FX becomes a major issue. The last bit, it's something that Guo and the team is exploring. So in the Philippines, Singapore to Philippines, Mojaloop Core Connector is connecting to an I2I, which is a blockchain distributed ledger-based alternative clearing platform. Very exciting for us. We currently, for the POC, just basically call the APIs to make the work. But we wanted to explore whether the Mojaloop system, the database integrity, the connectivity, would it work directly connecting to the blockchain as well? Now, this is something that we're exploring with our I2I partner, but there's a larger reason for that. As I mentioned very early, there's hope. CBDC, a number of different technologies that can actually simplify a lot of that. And a lot of that is based on CBDC stablecoins. Okay, let me say it out again, stablecoins. I know people don't want to talk about stablecoins anymore. But these are the things that can be leveraged to make the transaction settlement faster, cheaper, and atomic basis, right? And this is something that we want to explore as well. So this is another work stream that internally this our work is exploring as well. So next phase of the project, we put, so in the project, we couldn't do the end-to-end transaction. So what we done is within the sandboxes of each participant, we simulated the end-to-end transaction, and it works mostly as we hope that it worked, right? So I would like to call the project a big success. So it works as we hope that it will work. So from the POC perspective, it's very successful. The settlement window issue is currently trust-based. What that means is that it's an existing relationship that Union Bank in Philippines has with Visa Direct, and also Visa has with CB Bank as well. So they are comfortable taking the credit risk of each other, and therefore it makes the difference of settlement, the divergence of settlement window works in this particular thing. But once you try to commercialize it, this is an issue that we have to resolve. Later on, of course, there's a work stream that Steve had already mentioned, so very glad to hear that. The challenge from the technical standpoint is solvable. To making it cheaper and faster for cross-border remittance to work, a large part of it is the regulatory compliance. I've already made my sentiment around that known from the very beginning, but it's also something that is as important, if not more important, than the technology solution to make this a reality. Okay, that's it. Any questions? Oh, Michael, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to add a couple of things,
Please.
if that's okay. That were interesting learnings from the POC that I think will be used elsewhere. The first of those is that we discovered quite late on that Visa supports interconnection between directories, federated directories, effectively, that you can register your directory with Visa, and Visa will ask your directory directly, rather than expecting, as we originally thought, some sort of bizarre, well, no, it's not bizarre, but the fact of the matter is that Mojaloop doesn't currently have a way for bulk exporting addresses for routing purposes in centralized directories. So that was a good thing, and I think it's a thing that we will expect to feed into the whole question of address resolution. The second point, which was kind of a surprise to me, being naive in these matters, is that the originating wallet was expecting, because this is the way all their other connections work, was expecting to have a point-to-point agreement with the recipient institutions, the eventual recipients, because that's the way they work now. And they expected that agreement to include statements about KYC information, the fee information, because you have no idea who you're actually going to be sending to. It's the eventual Mojaloop institution which will be guaranteeing that they are okay. So although we've talked about connecting schemes with each other, one of the things that we will have to think about when we come to think about connecting individual institutions using these sorts of things is that they will have to make the conceptual move from the idea of a point-to-point agreement to the idea of an agreement with a scheme.
Thank you. Oh, there's. I think it's Jonathan.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I quickly just see how many hands there are? We're just running out of time. 1, 2, 3. All right, we'll take the 3.
Let me go hide.
Okay, thank you. My question is, you talked about the KYC information as one of the technical challenges. So probably I would like you to shed some more light on that one, because also I can see that is somehow maybe linked to the duplicated identifier, which is to do with the national ID systems. Thank you.
So from a regulatory standpoint, right, there's, your question is very short, but it's a lot more complex than the question itself. So KYC information, each nation have their own KYC standards and how to resolve those KYC. Each countries have their own blacklist repositories and what have you, and those are being checked, right? Whether that can be made cross-border, that's a broader question, right? And also whether or not all the participating countries can synchronize the KYC verification data that they need, and hopefully that challenge is being addressed, right? At the national BIS or whatever, whatever international organizations are involved. We hope that that can be addressed. So that's one issue, right? What information that is needed. The second level of issue is whether those systems can be captured in a way that is acceptable, right? So in Myanmar, we have, and I'm sure it's true in a lot of the emerging market as well. In Myanmar, we have a lot of citizens who live in far remote areas that have never had the need to have a national ID system. And it's not their fault. The bureaucracy doesn't extend there, and so they don't have national ID system. So the system cannot recognize that. And when, recognize those within the system. So how do you do that? There are biometrics, a number of different things to resolve that. But that, again, is a separate question, right? So, we have other organizations, MOSIP and what have you, trying to resolve that. So the second issue is about making sure that you're capturing the information of the unbanked and the underbanked, right? The banking system is now good enough to capture all the required KYC data. So with the account-to-account, that is relatively soft. It's at the synchronization level. Once you extend this to the unbanked and underbanked, it's actually getting the data itself, right? So that's a second level of challenge. And the third thing is, of course, how do you verify and authenticate that, right? So there's a number of different rules. Like, has that person, so the way that our financial system work, rightly or wrongly, is that the verification is based on transaction history. How do you onboard people that do not have transaction history? If people do not have transaction history, what banks generally tend to do, or payment systems generally tend to do, is immediately identify those without transaction history as fraudulent or suspicious activities. And we need to figure out a way to make sure that those type of barriers are removed or at least reduced. Hopefully I answer your question. Yes, Miller.
Thank you. I have several, but some I'll take offline. I just want to focus on the multi-alias thing for the moment. Some of this has actually been solved and solved quite well, but we seem to not have that here. So I want to bring it up again. The Pathfinder system is implemented by the GSMA. It's an international directory of phone numbers. Every phone number ever issued everywhere in the world is in this thing, except for a few exceptions. And it tells you one thing. It tells you who issues and who is responsible for that specific phone number now. However, it's based on the DNS, the domain name system, an international standard that has billions of data points in it. It's a federated standard that allows you to defer to the administrative authority who has the details involved based on a multi-layered strategy, right? What we should be looking at is what did we learn during the proof of concept we did with the GSMA on Pathfinder, and it either use Pathfinder exactly as it is because it's already working and it's already in the world, or replicate something like that. Again, using the DNS system. We don't need Visa to tell us how to do it. We can do this actually quite differently in a way that would be fully compatible with the use of a BIN number or the use of any other designation for a scheme that we choose to use. And so I think we should take a step back and not try to reinvent that, but first look at the stuff that was there, reinforce that. Secondly, a very, very small point. I very much like the idea of last to file wins on the registration for aliases. I registered last. I guarantee you the reason I registered is because I want to pay right now. So let's reinforce that point through learning as if we can. But you have to have the other piece too. The user must be in control of the mapping of that phone number. So that means you're now placing essentially a burden on the DFSP because every wallet will have to have the ability to what we'll call set as default. One minor point to that, you can't have the DFSP say in their wallet, here are the list of all of your choices, which one would you like to be default? It's not there. They don't have the responsibility for that. They can respond only to their own account information and give the user the ability to set that account as default. So you will have to open a separate wallet in order to switch to the other one. That should be fine until the payment operator decides that they'd like to do that themselves automatically to continue to be the preferred receiver. And so there has to be a scheme gesture in the scheme rules that says you can't do that. You can only you can only set as default with the explicit permission of the end user account holder. And so with those three pieces, you can essentially, you can get down to at least I can manage in a world where I can only have one bound alias at a time, and I can move between them. But I'm very much interested to hear your experience in thinking through prefix and suffix for sub-IDs, essentially. That's a case where you would say, either I say it is this payment system and now this phone number, or I have 5 different uses of this, and it's the -2 version that I'd like you to send money to, not the -3 version. And so there's different ways of looking at it, but I think that needs to be explored a little bit. But anyway, I'll leave the other ones for our offline discussion. Thank you.
Just remember that you're between everyone's lunch and your question, so please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe before Michael goes, and just to double click on the comment by Miller, if we allow DFSPs to register customers, we'll have a challenge because What happened in Kenya is that we allowed DFSPs to register on behalf of their customers, and customers are multiple. So you'd find one DFSP would register all their parties, and they would become the primary account, designate primary account, defined in the system, and then the second DFSP would register the account holders, and it would be a moving game. So the solution we did is that we empowered the customer through the front-facing app. So the customer decides, what is my primary account? What account am I linking to my alias? And that addressed the whole issue. Yeah. Thank you.
So just a quick note, right? So that solution was considered, but for the POC itself, that would require some level of changes on the payee and the payer DFSP as well. So that's something that we consider for the POC itself. We decided that was not something that we wanted to ask our participating DFSP, but that is definitely something that is very, very workable. And thank you for the comments. We definitely, appreciate that.
So I just wanted to come back on the things that Miller said in reverse order, because Michael also added some stuff on that. One of the things that Kawang and I did as part of this, though we didn't actually implement it, was to work out a form that would allow two-factor authentication with the customer to verify whether or not a request coming from the DFSP was actually approved by them. So that would get us round the problem that we've always stumbled on in the past, which is that of needing to provide some form of interface. So the idea is basically, it's a simple idea. The idea is that in order to register this, the customer has to get an OTP, which they have to type in. We use the authorizations endpoint that we already have for that, and that enables the system to validate that a request for changing the attribution of a number really was initiated by the customer and not part of a land grab by the DFSP. Yeah, or fraud. Now, the first point. I think the problem here is that, I'm going to speed up. The problem here is that Pathfinder identifies phones by mobile network operator. That's all it can do. Now, the problem that we have here is that the mobile money systems are not run by the mobile network operators. Okay. Okay, yeah, you're right. It does do that. But it doesn't get you any further because you've still got the duplicate question.
Well, no, it actually gives you put anything what you want. You can list 10 of them. It doesn't solve for the default.
But we have that already because that's what the Oracle currently contains.
Sorry, I'm going to interject here because of time.
Michael, I was talking specifically about the federated payment systems and not the resolution control. We can talk later.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really glad that it has generated a lot of feedback. We actually really want to incorporate all of those feedbacks, so please let us know. We'll also be releasing the demo videos and everything, how this works. The user interface and at the coding level, and the white paper as well. And so we really would welcome any feedback that you have, any questions that you have. We really want to make sure that this is moving into an implementable and scalable framework. Thank you very much.